Hello students, I am Dr. Garima Srivastava from Lal Bahadur Shastri College, Lucknow. I am going to take up the topic of interviews and interview skills, what we require for the interviews. Now, coming down to the topic, first of all we need to understand what an interview is. It is essentially a structured conversation between two participants where we call them an interviewer and an interview. Both of them come together face to face, you can say across the table, and where an interviewer places some kind of questions in front of the interviewee, and the interviewee is expected to answer those questions with full confidence, which would depict his educational background and his skills. Now, the word interview, it comes from the word one-to-one conversation between an interviewer and the interviewee. The interviewer asks certain questions of which the interviewee responds. Now, of course, we know that interview is an important part for every course whatever we study. Whenever we need a kind of job, we undergo a kind of interview. So, interview is an important part to understand for the part of interviewer as well as interviewee. Now, here for the purpose of business communication, I would be telling about what are the essentials that an interviewer should keep in mind and what are the essentials that an interviewee should keep in mind. Now, coming down to interview is the most critical component of the entire selection process. Now, to understand the selection process, it is necessary what is exactly a selection. Now, this selection is for a job or a vacancy that is being created in an organization. Now, this vacancy can be uploaded on the websites, can be given in an advertisement on a newspaper where the applicant applies for this kind of vacancy. Now, whenever the applicant thinks that he is fit for certain kind of vacancy, he applies for these vacancies which are published in a newspaper or on an interview or on an internet. It serves the primary means to collect additional information on an applicant. It serves as a basis of assessment for the applicant's job related knowledge, skills and ability. Now, what does this mean? It means whenever we are going to apply for an interview, we need to give a certain kind of information to the interviewer or the organization through which the organization comes to know that the applicant is suitable for this particular kind of job or vacancy. Now, this particular kind of information about the interviewee, it can be given through a resume or it can be given through a curriculum vitae. Now, we need to understand what are the different types of interview. When we come down to the different types of interview, it is kept in mind by the interviewer that what kind of interview he is going to conduct with the interviewee. Now, of course, the types of interview will directly depend on the types of vacancy. If the vacancy or the job is a kind of a complicated job which needs a high level of skills and specialization of the interviewee, there is a need to structure the interview and ask the certain questions which are essential for the job to be conducted. Now, for this purpose, coming down to the very first one type of interview is unstructured non-directive interview. As the name suggests, it is unstructured. That means the number of questions, the types of questions are not structured beforehand by the interviewer. Interviewer will always structure the question, it will always ask the question in a random order whenever the interviewee comes in or whenever he comes into the across the table. There is generally no set format to follow so that the interview can take place in various directions. So, now various directions means this kind of non-structured interview, through this non-structured interview, different kinds of questions can be put up. Now, these questions can be from a various kinds of background, wherein the interviewer can ask about the educational background, can ask about the family background, can ask about the different educational experience and different kinds of projects that the interviewee has undergone. Now, similarly coming down to the second type, that is the structured kind of interview. Now, as the name suggests, the structured kind of interview, it means structured questions are being taken into in advance, and these questions are structured beforehand before the interview comes for the interviewer comes for the interviewer. The interviewer lists certain kinds of question and acceptable responses in advance. That means through these structured interview, the type of answers are also listed beforehand before the interviewee comes for the interview. An interview consists of a series of job related questions that are asked consistently of each applicant. Particularly job is known as a structured interview. That means here the responsibility of the interviewer is more, because interviewer will go through the job description, and he will see what all are the responsibilities and the duties of this particular kind of job, and then he will structure different types of questions that he is going to put up in front of the interview. He will also type out the different kinds of response he would require from the interviewee for that particular kind of job. So, for that purpose, the type of interview is called as structured interview. Now comes the situational interview, the third kind of interview. Now, as the name suggests, it means situational interview. Now, different kinds of situations are given to the interviewee, and interviewee will be answering these questions through his experience, through his educational background. Now, of course, situational interview means you are trying to put the interviewee in a kind of difficult situation, in a kind of stress situation, and trying to see what will be the reaction of this interviewee in this particular situation. So, the candidates are interviewed about what actions they would take in various job related situations. Now, this kind of interviews are important for some jobs where different situations pop up randomly, and where the different decision making abilities are being tested from the interviewee. Situational interviews ask interviewees to describe how they would react to a hypothetical situation that comes up in the organization. Now, the fourth one, behavioral interview. Candidates are asked about what actions they have taken in prior job situations that are similar to the situations they may encounter in the job. That means, over here we try to understand what kind of different decisions have been taken by the interviewee in different situations that he has been in the various jobs beforehand. This technique involves asking the interviewees standardized questions about how they handled the past situations. That means, whatever situations have occurred in the past, how the interviewee is able to handle those situations, and how far he was successful in handling those kind of critical situations that came up into the organization. Now, this handling of different situations in the organization will also depict different kinds of behaviors of the interviewee. Now, by behavior we mean that the different behaviors, the extrovert behavior or an introvert behavior, behavior that helps you to fight the particular current situation or issues in the organization. Now comes the fifth one, that is the job related interview. Now, job related interview, it means it is specifically this kind of interview is specifically focusing on the different aspects of the job, different factors of the job, and how the person is going to deal with these aspects or the factors of the job. Then comes your stress interview. Stress interview is somewhat related to the situational interview, wherein different stress situations, different situations which bring in stress for the interviewee are taken up and given to the interviewee, and the interviewee is asked to handle these situations with the help of his experience or with the help of his experience. Now, of course, this interview will help the interviewer to check about the tolerance level, stress tolerance level of the interviewee. Now, these kind of interviews can be conducted for the middle level management or the high level or the top level management, because these level of management jobs are basically focusing on the decision making abilities and handling different stress situations or the issues that come up in the organization. Over here in the if we talk about middle level management or the top level management, it is full of different situations that come up or that pop up during the working of the organization. Now, in these particular situations, how is an interviewee able to handle his stress? He is able to handle the stress of the organization, is able to maintain different emotional quotient of himself, of his own individual personality, as well as he is able to manage the different organizational aspects. Now, stress interviews may help to unearth hypersensitivity of different applicants. That means you are able to understand the level of management of the applicant, how far he is able to manage his anger or his abuse in the organization or in the workplace. Now, coming down to the 7th one, that is the panel interview. Now, panel means a panel, a person, a team of people come up and they ask random questions to the interview. Now, this panel can consist of 5 to 7 members, and the panel is a panel of expert people of different specialization, different educational background. They ask question from their own fields, their own specialization fields to the interviewee. Now, over here it is important for the interview to be very calm and very confident, and confidently listen to each and every question the panel puts up. Now, here if he is scared or if he is not confident in his own specialization area or in his educational background, here he will not be able to face such kind of interview, because talking one to one is somewhat simpler as we compared by talking in a panel. That means here interviewee is going to face a number of people, 5 to 7 people, wherein level of confidence is required, which will come through the education or the skills of that particular interviewee. Now, a panel interview, also known as a board interview, that means a board of people will be coming across you, is an interview conducted by a team of interviewers who together interview each candidate and then combine their ratings into a final score. That means this panel, this whole team of people who are coming for the interview of the interviewee, they will be ranking, they will be rating the person, they will be giving scores to the person differently on their own set standards, whatever they are having, and then these final scores of the interviewee will be taken up from the total scores of each of the panel member. Now, coming down to the 8th one, that is one-to-one interview. Now, one-to-one interview, that means one person talking to the other person. That means on one side of the table we will be having an interviewer, and on the other side the interviewee will be there. In a typical employment interview, the applicant meets one-to-one with an interviewer. As the interview may be highly emotional occasion for the applicant, meeting alone with the interviewer is often less threatening. Now, as I have already talked about, that means panel interviews are somewhat difficult to face for a interviewee as compared to one-to-one interview. Now, coming down to the last one, that is the mass interview or a group interview. Now, these kind of interviews are being conducted when we have a large number of applications for a particular job. Now, for screening of these number of applications, it is very difficult if the number of vacancies are less for the organization. Now, what does this organization do? When the organization publishes a vacancy for a particular kind of job that is being coming up in the organization, a number of applications come up in the organization to apply for this kind of vacancy. Now, these applications are being screened or shortlisted on certain standards by the employer or the organization. Now, when we shortlist these particular applications, so the large number of applications are being rejected and we get a simple lot. Now, these particular applicants are called for this mass interview. Okay, you can call it as a group interview, wherein you can place 5 to 7 people or 10 people in a group, and you can give them a current situation or a particular question on which they are going to do certain kind of discussion. Now, what does this help in? When you place 10 or 5 to 7 people in this particular group with a certain question, they go in for group discussions, and this it can lead an organization to again shortlist certain candidates, certain number of candidates, say about 2 or 3 candidates from 5 to 7 candidates, and through on different standards such as you can say leadership skills, communication skills, knowledge about the topic and knowledge about the educational skills. whatever they are having this particular group, and then again we get a lesser number of people. So, this kind of interviews are conducted wherein we get a large number of applications and a large number of applicants are there for a particular kind of job. In a mass or group interview, a panel interview interviews several candidates in a simultaneous order. That means a different panel, a number of people, 5 to 7 people in a panel come up, and they call in a number of people for the interview. That means the panel is not going to interview one person, it is going to interview a number of persons simultaneously. The panel poses a problem and then watches to see which candidate takes the lead in formulating an answer. That means, now what does panel sees? Panel sees the leadership skills, it sees the different educational and skill background of these people who come up and answer these questions in a first order. Then comes the phone interview or telephonic round of interview. Employers do some kind of interview entirely by the phone. That means, they do not call up any of the interviews in the venue, they just put up certain questions. These questions may be structured or unstructured on the telephone itself, and the interviewee is asked certain questions. This kind of interview is somewhat simpler for the interviewee to answer, because he is not going to face anyone face to face. This can actually be more accurate than face to face interview. Why? Because the person who is skilled, who is educated can hesitate to face the panel or can hesitate to face the interviewer in a face to face manner. On a telephone he may be more confident. So, this kind of interview becomes more easy for a person to appear for. Now, here neither party needs to worry about the things like appearance or handshakes, or each focus on a substantive answers, or perhaps the candidate somewhat surprised by an unexpected call from the interview. Now, of course, when we talk about the telephonic round of interviews, there is no need to worry about what you are wearing, what kind of appearance you are having, what time of the day it is, or you need not worry about the type of sitting erect in front of the interview, or coming in or knocking the door. No such kind of problems are there. Only you have to answer the interviewer on the other side on the telephone. Now, here interviewee is needed to be attentive to listen to the different questions the interviewer is asking, and of course, he needs to greet the person at the start of the call, and he also needs to greet the person at the end of the call whenever the call ends. Now, on the telephonic round of interview, there is a specific necessity for the interviewee, wherein the interviewee has to answer in just an accurate way, in just and precise manner, the exact answer of whatever the interviewer is saying. Now, coming down to the interview skills, we have studied about the different types of interview. Now, it is important to understand the different kinds of skills which are required by the interviewee or the person who is going to face the interview. Now, this becomes an important aspect. Why? Because so as to grab a job, it is necessary for an interviewee to have certain kinds of skills. Now, first of all, it is very important that the interviewee knows about certain questions which are frequently asked by the interviewer. Now, very frequent questions are, tell me about yourself or introduce yourself. That means, the very first question which can be asked by an interviewer can be the introduction of the interviewee himself or herself. Now, of course, we all are aware about such questions which can be asked by the interviewer. So, it becomes the responsibility of the interviewee that he prepares himself accordingly, and he prepares a good and appropriate introduction for himself whenever he is asked for. Now, what can be the different questions? What is the major challenge you faced, and why should I hire you? Now, these are certain particular questions for which the answers should be ready with the interviewer. Now comes the interview skills. Now interviewing is a skill in itself or of itself, one of which your ability to interact with the interviewer and to articulate your facts are factors that are important in getting the job. Now that means these are the factors, these skills becomes the main factors, important essential factors for the interviewee to get that particular job. Now what are these skills? Now very first one is the non-verbal communication skills. Now what do we call as non-verbal communication skills? Now non-verbal communication skills means where your body language, your facial expression, your gestures, your handshakes all come into action. Now of course you need to know what are the certain standards for non-verbal communication. That means now when we talk about non-verbal communication, facial expression, it all starts while you knock the door and come in for the interview. As an interviewee, it is important when you knock the door and come in for the interviewer come in for the interview in front of the interviewer. It becomes important for the interviewee that his facial expression does not show that he is not confident. He should be very confident. He should be making an eye to eye contact with the interviewer. He should be well dressed up. The hair should be very well tied up, or they should be combed, and of course formal dress should be there. Then coming down to the second kind of skill, that is the verbal communication skill. Now this skill is known as when we start speaking, that means the oral communication, or when we start giving the answers of the different questions that are being put up by the interviewer. Now verbal communication, it also has certain principles when we start giving the answers of the interviewer. Now of course when we give the answers to the interviewer, the interviewee should be very humble, he should be very courteous, and he should answer all the questions according to the knowledge and the education background of that particular person. Now of course it is responsibility of the interviewee over here that verbal communication should not be rude at all. That means you should be very humble whenever you are giving the answer to the interviewer. Now of course if suppose the interviewee is not able to answer certain questions, he is not aware of a certain question. So here the interviewee can say, sorry sir, I am not getting the question, or I am not aware of the answer of this question. It is simple, it is very easy to say this, and it is highly acceptable by the interviewer. Not all questions can be answered by each of the interviewee. Now so here it becomes the responsibility of the interviewee that his body language, that means non-verbal communication, goes in accordance with the verbal communication, and he gives confidently all kinds of answer he knows. And of course if he does not know certain kind of answers, he should say that he is not aware of the answer of this particular question. Now thirdly, friendliness. Friendliness means the level of courteousness or level of humility that you are going to present in front of the interviewer. That means you need to show that you are respecting the other person, other side of the table, and you are greeting him and then asking him to be seated in front of him to give the certain answer. So then comes the next point, that is brevity. Now brevity means briefness, that means how far you are able to define your question, you are able to structure your answer, you are able to understand the question and structure your answer. Now a structure of an answer should be very precise, that means the answer should be to the point, it should not be more elaborative, it should be to the point, it should be very clear. You should give the answer in a clear and calm manner, and of course the answer should be brief, that means you should not be more elaborative in any kind of answers. Give that much answer, give that frame that much sentences that are expected from you. Then comes the next point, that is respect. Respect is an important aspect from both the sides of the table. Whenever the interviewer asks or puts up a question, it becomes important for the interviewer that he also places some kind of respect for the interviewee. It is not acceptable if the interviewer says a question in a rude manner, or an interviewer interviewee gives the answer in a rude manner. So, respect is expected from both sides of the table. Then comes the next point, that is empathy. That means understanding the feelings of the interviewer. That means whatever are the feelings behind the question, the interviewee should understand the feelings behind that particular question, and he should not take those questions in a personal manner and give the answers in a rude manner. That means you have to give every answer in an empathetic manner within the feelings of the answers of that particular question. Then comes the listening part. That means you need to listen the questions of the interviewer in a very attentive manner, because repeating the questions and asking to repeat the questions is somewhat, we can say, bad manners when we come across an interview. So, listen to the questions very clearly, give 2-3 seconds to understand that question, and then give the answer after analyzing your educational background. Then comes the confidence. Now, confidence will come when you come prepared for the interview. That means when you come prepared for your interview with your education background. So, always brush up your skills before appearing for the interview. Always revise your educational background, about yourself, different questions that can be put by the interviewer in front of you, and then this will make you more confident in front of the interviewer. Now, what is the importance of the interview skills? Now, these skills will help us prepare for the different aspects of the interview. Now, for an interview, it is important that we prepare pre-interview and post-interview aspects of the particular interview. Now, for interview, it is important that I understand the different educational background, and we understand the different questions that are being put up by the interviewer, and of course, then give analyze the questions and then give the answer. Now, something is required before the interview and some aspects are required after the interviews also. Now, what is required before the interview? If you see, before the interview, you have to analyze yourself. That means analyzing yourself, you have to analyze your own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of yours. So, it is important that you present your skills, you present your strengths in front of the interviewer, and of course, you decrease the number of weaknesses in front of the interviewer. Then identify your skills based on your educational background, your different educational background, experience, skill sets. You need to identify the different skills you have. Now, these skills will make your strengths. That means, for example, we can have a highly dynamic personality, we can have a very hard working person, a very laborious person, a very cooperative person. All these can be your skills if you understand yourself and if you understand the different ways of working of your own self. Then researching the organization. Now, of course, when you come for the interview for a job vacancy in an organization, it is important that you understand what are the various aspects of that organization itself. Now, when I talk about the researching the organization, it means you need to come prepared about the different vision, mission of that particular organization. You also need to understand, you also need to search about different landmarks or different milestones that organization has covered. Now, this particular knowledge of yours, it will give you a plus point that what kind of organization you are going to give this interview for. And of course, if a question is being put, why do you want to join the job? Now, here you can put up different aspects related to vision, mission of that particular organization itself. So, if you prepare yourself researching about the organization, then only you will be able to beat up that particular interview in the interview panel. Then comes the analyzing the job position. Now, of course, after analyzing about the organization, you also need to analyze what kind of job you are going to apply for. Now, if you are going to apply for a particular kind of job, you need to present those skills which are related to these job itself. Why do we do so? Because to present such skills, it is important that you are aware of the job and which will make you fit for this particular kind of job. Then comes revising your subject, be prepared, brush up your skills and give your interview with full confidence. Developing the interview file. Now, this file will consist of a covering letter, a resume or a CV, and then of course, all testimonials and documents which are required for the interview. Now, for post interview, we need to follow up, we need to take a feedback from the interviewer or the organization from time to time, that what has been the result of my interview. Now, these interview skills will help the interview to beat up the different to give answers of different questions that are being put up by the interviewer in a very accurate, precise and clear manner, and your brushing up of skills, your educational background will help you to get grab that job in that particular organization. Thank you.